Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing for Thursday, the 14th of August, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway, Robert. Good morning. Let's start off with this Trump administration's dismantling of the CRS. So the CRS, well, just briefly take us through what that is, please, Robert.
So the Community Relations Service is a division of the Department of Justice. And the idea is that they deploy to areas where there are like high profile crimes that might be racially charged in order to basically calm tensions inside of the community.
Okay. And previously, CRS has been accused of going to these victims' families and scheduling these press conferences, and the victim's family comes out and says, "We forgive the killer. It wasn't racially motivated. No protest, no nothing. We want healing and forgiveness, and we're going to move on." And they do that so that there's no backlash. There's no maybe protests against this thing. Maybe in the direction they want them to go. Generally, is that one of the things they do?
Correct.
Okay. And so the Trump administration here is looking at killing that. Previously, they hadn't, and they continued to receive funding, and people complained about it on social media, and I guess probably urged the Trump administration to act here.
Yeah, this was supposed to happen in President Trump's 2026 budget request, and then ended up being cut out of it. But so far, they have lost 30 out of 50 of the lawyers that are in that division since January. I think mostly through voluntary resignations. But what happened yesterday is that these CRS employees were told that they're going to receive only a 30 days notice for future layoffs. And that's down from the normal 60-day notice period, which I think is a sign that the Trump administration is making moves to effectively eliminate the CRS. Because while they have this ostensible mission of like cooling off tensions, there have been past incidents with evidence that they are going into some of these high-profile incidents and actually supporting protests on one side. And this came from the Orlando Sentinel during the Zimmerman trial here in Florida in 2012, that they were basically caught through the FOIA process, documents saying that they quote provided technical assistance and support for protest deployment against Zimmerman during that case.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is clearly weaponization of the federal government. So net effect here, Robert, is maybe some of these protests and police-involved shootings, for instance, will decrease. On the flip side, well, I don't want to get too far in the weeds on this. Would all be hypothetical. But net effect, is this going to cause more or less social instability?
I'm not. I think there is a risk that
case dependent.
Yeah, I think it's case dependent. I think there is a risk that there could be more instability if they are eliminated. This division is completely laid off, and we do see victims that come out and do. I think like in the most recent one, that Ohio incident where there were two people who were attacked by a group of people in the street. And one of the victims did come out and give a press conference basically saying that the person who attacked her, and I think the person she was with, were basically just released. They already had criminal records and were just released back onto the street. And some of that I think could potentially increase some instability.
Mm-hmm. All right. Many such cases. Let's move on to the latest from DC. And the Republicans have a DC crime bill. Is this going to repeal DC home rule, Robert?
I don't think that's what Trump is asking for. This was at a speaking event at the Kennedy Center, Kennedy Arts Center yesterday, and he asked Republicans in Congress to pass a bill that would extend his control over the police department in DC. And also he wants to fund basically public renovation projects in the Capitol, which I think the intent behind that is kind of that broken windows policing doctrine, that if you do one, prosecute these smaller crimes, they don't snowball into bigger crimes. And just having a better looking public space also kind of deters some of these smaller crimes.
Mm-hmm. On that note, I've seen a ton of videos on Reddit and Blue Sky and other social media outlets that cater to the left. Yesterday, I talked about this this new protest movement, anti-Trump resistance movement. I think it was called Free DC or something like that. And I think DC could become probably not the epicenter of anti-Trump resistance, but clearly they are trying to build the human infrastructure there for protests, for civil disobedience, for direct action demonstrations against federal law enforcement, probably not against the National Guard, but maybe. And just as a reminder, the worst case scenario, maybe not the worst case scenario, one of the worst things the Trump administration can do, federal or local DC law enforcement can do, is overreact, use any kind of violence that could be framed as police brutality, casting the protesters as innocent victims, and reinforcing this fascist narrative. And I think that's a big risk going forward. We're not to the ramp up stage yet on resistance. We have seen some overt kind of nonviolent resistance happening in limited cases. And eventually that is going to ramp up. And in many places, law enforcement is going to have their hands full again. So thanks for that, Robert. And then finally, let's move here to what is this? Health and Human Services, building up the Strategic Drug Reserve.
Yeah, President Trump ordered HHS yesterday to create a list of 26 critical drugs, and he wants HHS to fill the Strategic Active Pharmaceutical Ingredient Reserve with a 6-month supply of those APIs in order to make basically a 6-month supply of those critical drugs. I think this is addressing something we pointed out for more than a year now, that the U.S. is very heavily dependent on imports of a lot of not just finished drugs, but these active ingredients. And two, I think this might be a precursor, sort of a preemptive move to build up this strategic reserve ahead of those pharmaceutical tariffs that Trump is threatening to implement in the next couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. Is this strategic drug reserve, do you think this is just standard national security, or is this because there's a reasonable expectation of some major disruption to global trade or to global drug manufacturing that could affect the United States?
I think it's both, because the Department of Defense has been talking about problems sourcing drugs since 2023. I think it's when they released the report that they wanted to actually basically fund the construction of domestic drug manufacturing here for military use specifically, just because we're so dependent on those foreign imports. But I do think this is in anticipation of those supply chain disruptions that could come from the tariffs, because if I remember correctly, Trump is talking about the initial rollout is like a 50% tariff on pharmaceutical imports.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on to the global sit rep. Jared, good morning.
There we go.
All right. This Putin summit is coming up. Is it today?
Tomorrow.
Oh, that's Friday. That's right. Right. Friday. All right. It's coming up tomorrow, and people are already sinking their claws into what they want Trump to do and say against Putin here. So what's the latest?
Absolutely. So this is coming off of a video call from President Trump, a few European leaders, and Ukrainian President, Emmanuel Macron was on this, but Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, there we go. So they were establishing guidelines for the meeting. Basically, hey, there are certain things please don't do. Like, Trump's not going to give territorial concessions to Russia from Ukraine. That was established, which I don't think was on the table anyway. Just it's not his place to do. Not to say he couldn't say, Anyway, President Trump also said that all security guarantees given to Ukraine by the United States would be independent from NATO. So there would be no risk of triggering Article 5 there if we are providing security services to them. And theoretically, that would also go in reverse. So if the Europeans are offering it, it would also be independent from NATO. And in addition to that, Trump actually set out what his main goal is with this whole thing, which is to achieve a ceasefire with immediate follow-on peace negotiations. And that would be where Russia and Ukraine probably do talk about territorial concession, because, frankly, Russia now owns a fair portion of it, and the Ukrainians haven't been able to take it back.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks. Keep us updated on just kind of the high points. Let's move on, and Jared, I'll let you take it from here, but let's talk about Vanuatu.
Yeah. But so, yep, this is coming out of Australia and Vanuatu. Now, they agreed to what they're calling the Nakamal Agreement, and this is a massive investment from Australia into just this one island. This is about 500 million Australian dollars, which is 327 million US dollars, which I think it's interesting to note that they're using Aussie dollars and not the international currency. But regardless, they are doing so. Now, this agreement includes investments into data centers, security assistance and support, a 100 million Australian dollar investment for impacts of climate change, because all the Pacific Island nations actually have that as part of their national security. They say, hey, yeah, we're going to be flooded. We'll see. Along with several undisclosed investments making up the balance. So there's only actually about 300 million of that 500 million disclosed. So there's going to be a lot of extra investments there. And the security, I think, is very important to note, because that's what Australia does around the region. All of the Pacific Islands and that fence that we showed a couple of, I think it was last week, they try to provide security for each one of those. And as a point of comparison, the U.S. they also pledged money to the Pacific Island Forum as a whole, which Vanuatu is part of, but they only offered 60 million for investment. So this is over 5 times what the U.S. is offering,
and this
which is
is
enormous.
This is to prevent Chinese influence in these Pacific Islands, correct?
Yes, the U.S.
All right, let's go ahead and move on.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to Mexico requesting this U.S. drone overflight. This is interesting.
Yeah, this made headlines yesterday. A CBP drone, a Customs Border Patrol drone, flew down over Valle de Bravo, which is kind of a suburb of Mexico City. It's right next to it, and that's in southern Mexico. You can see it plotted on the map here. Now, the Mexican Secretary of Security and Civilian Protection, he said that no foreign drones can go into Mexico without authorization and a request from Mexico, thereby saying we authorized this and we requested all of this overflight. I haven't found any statement on what the actual mission was, presumably as part of the ongoing security cooperation between the U.S. and Mexico. Then we're just going to stay south of the border, running all the way through Latin America. Panama's comp controller filed 2 cases with the Panamanian Supreme Court at the end of July. So this is a little bit older, but it's extremely important. And this is to revoke C.K. Hutchison's operations deal for the ports of Cristobal and Balboa. These are the 2 ports that are supposed to be sold to BlackRock. Now, Flores, the comptroller, he declared it wrong that in other parts of the world, there are people negotiating the future of assets that belong to us, the Panamanians. Basically, hey, we're going to assert sovereignty over this. These are ours. There's no reason anybody should have it. And that's one of the grounds that they're using for this, is that a foreign nation owns territory in Panama, which is not permitted down there. So you can operate things, but you cannot own the territory. Now, if either case succeeds, the port operations will just be reopened to a bid, and C.K. Hutchison will lose the right to operate these ports, giving the United States a pretty big opportunity to just step in and say, all right, cool, we'll operate it for you.
So that's the big bottom line, is we're probably talking about U.S. control over the Panama Canal again.
Very likely, and China's absolutely not going to let that. They're not going to take that line down. They want to control each of those ports.
Sure. It sure is funny that China, and in many cases, rightly accuses the United States of hegemony and wanting to get their claws into every little nook and cranny of the world. But China has, other than shipping massive amounts of goods through the Panama Canal, I mean, they have absolutely they obviously have geopolitical interests in it, but they have no geopolitical claim on controlling these overseas ports. But they do, all over the world, have these massive financial interests, and in many cases, controlling stakes in European ports all over the world. Absolutely wild. Thanks for that update, Jared. And let's move on to Brazil.
Yep, I'll hit these real quick. The State Department is revoking visas for a couple of Brazilian officials and their family members because they were part of an organization formerly called the Pan American Health Organization, and that the State Department said helped the Cuban government coerce labor from Cuban medical professionals. There were similar actions taken, just not part of the Pan American Health Organization, against officials from Africa, Cuba, and Grenada. And then probably the biggest news out of Brazil for the last 24 hours, President Lula da Silva announced an aid package to counter the U.S. sanctions and tariffs. So there's going to be a lot of internal stuff there, just forgiveness of some regulations. That way businesses can operate. And at the same announcement, da Silva called on members of BRICS to, quoting, test alternatives to the dollar for trade among BRICS nations, while also stating, contradictorily, we do not want to mess with the dollar. So, hey, we're not trying to displace the dollar, but trying to stop using the dollar, which is displacement. Now, that was a red line for Trump. Trump said specifically to the BRICS, if you do this, we're going to tariff you into oblivion. Mm-hmm. So I would say expect all of your BRICS nations to catch some more tariffs if they take this up positively.
Mm-hmm. You know, this Lula da Silva for a couple of years now, at least, since I think literally the day he was elected, has been pushing BRICS common currency. He's previously pushed this Mercosur, like a pan South American currency. He's wanted to get off the dollar for a while. Brazil is a major, it may be the largest economy in South America.
I think so.
I would be really surprised if Lula da Silva is actually successful in getting off the dollar, but it sure seems like there's going to be a ton of coercion and punishment, a lot of stick from the United States. As you previously said, Trump has warned these countries, do not de-dollarize, or I don't know, I guess what the Trump administration is going to try to sink Brazil here or something.
Yes, it was on threat of additional tariffs right before their BRICS summit that just happened, saying, you do this, I'm going to wreck you. And we can't forget that there is, the tariffs are kind of an intermediary measure. There's always the SWIFT option. It's rough, but it is there and it has been used.
Okay, so if the Trump administration were to cut off Brazil from SWIFT, so the international payment settlement system, from the rails of the U.S., the global U.S. dollar system, it seems to me like the big risk is Brazil moves to the Chinese version, or there's some maybe acceleration of BRICS rails. I don't know. It seems to me like that there could be a lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Because just like we saw when Biden went after Russia and sanctioned Russia and tried to and froze these Russian assets and tried to kick Russia off the international dollar system, there were a lot of unintended consequences here. It seems to me, if maybe you're on the edge and if you're a country on the edge and you say, I don't really like China, I don't really want to get embedded with the United States either. It seems to me like if you expect your days are numbered, or you could be at risk of being immediately kicked off the dollar system for not falling in line on whatever U.S. foreign policy is, you may just preemptively say, we're looking for a solution. And, I don't know, maybe that's an idea that could catch on.
Yeah. I do want to point out that those unintended consequences probably cut both ways. It still sticks with me to this day that as soon as Russia entered negotiations on ceasefire with Ukraine, before they even asked for peace, for ceasefire, territorial concessions, the first thing they asked from the U.S. was put us back on SWIFT. So you can put up a big face, but at the end of the day, if you're demanding to get re-access to the dollar, that says that it was probably a lot more effective than what a lot of us understand.
Yeah. One thing the Treasury Department did under Janet Yellen and Biden is, I've talked about this several times before, they actually sent Treasury Department officials around the world. They sent Deputy Director of the Treasury, Wally Adeyemo, to Turkey to warn these Turkish banks, disconnect from the MIR payment system, which is the international payment system for Russia. It's not really the SWIFT equivalent, but it is their international payment system. They said, disconnect your banks or face consequences, which would probably be some form of sanction or being removed from SWIFT as well. So I would not expect that MIR is going to be able to reestablish those connections quickly, and that's probably a big reason why Russia wants back on SWIFT. And also another reason why China has been preparing their alternative as maybe a backup to SWIFT, lifeboat. All right, thanks for that, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on to a couple things here. 89 protests today. By the way, there is going to be this weekend, there's going to be a national day of action. I don't expect a lot from it. These are just, again, toothless protests. They're not politically significant. I would say it is just above background noise. But the bottom line there is these groups have organized and mobilized. They have a sustained protest movement, which is a building block for everything else to come. So something I'm keeping an eye on. Speaking of that, let's go ahead and move on here. This afternoon, coming up at 2 p.m. Central Time, I'm conducting this month's Color Revolution briefing. I'm wrapping this big thing in a bow. I'm talking strategy, tactics, my outlook, the timeline for when I think things are going to progress into 2026, then obviously into 2028. And we're also going to talk about 2 or 3 scenarios that could cause this protest to resistance to revolutionary movement to culminate prematurely. Could it happen prior to 2028 or 2029? And again, in 2 or 3 cases, I think it could. And that's something you need to be aware of. And just briefly, this is the kind of big picture strategy here. Protests, which are happening today. And then once you have this big base of protests built up, now you can escalate to resistance. And that's going to be disruptive. That's civil disobedience. That's like blocking highways. That's doing sit-ins and occupations, a number of things that we're eventually going to see. And then in a worst case scenario, if necessary, TBD, to be decided, being able to launch into this revolutionary movement. So this is members only coming up in the Forward Observer briefing room today, 2 p.m. Central Time. If you'd like to sit in on that or watch the recording, head over to forwardobserver.com, sign up for a free 7-day trial, and understand what this big picture situation looks like so that you have time to prepare for it and know what to expect. All right, let's move on here and talk about speaking of the 2026 midterms. You know, sometimes it's really good to kind of take the temperature of this fight within the Democrat Party between the progressive establishment or moderate and progressive establishment versus the Democratic Socialist wing of the party. And over in the New Republic, which is a more to the progressive Democratic Socialist side, they published an article and they complained that establishment Democrats are risking electoral failure because they're planning to run a slate of moderate candidates in the 2026 midterms. You go over to the DCCC website, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and they're targeting 35 districts. And this is their plan to flip the House. These are the 35 districts that they say we need to target. These are maybe vulnerable Republicans or districts where a Republican won by a very slim majority, and we think we can flip them. And this article is all about how the Democratic establishment is just absolutely tone deaf to what's actually happening in the grassroots left in this country. This article does point out that Senator Bernie Sanders, an independent but a socialist from Vermont, has a higher approval rating at +11 than the Democrat Party, which is -32. So that's a swing of 43 points, this article points out. And the author also says the Democrats have learned absolutely nothing from the recent successes of these Democratic Socialists like New York mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani. And I'm going to read you this quote here. I think it's pretty good. The author writes, quote, "This critique isn't about ideology. It's about winning. Like Harris and her advisors, the historically unpopular leaders of the Democratic Party are operating off a failed model that prioritizes a candidate's approval by corporate interests over their ability to channel the populist frustrations being expressed by Americans across the political spectrum." And he concludes, "By refusing to absorb the lessons of 2024, the establishment is now imperiling Democrats' chances in 2026. Regardless of what happens in next year's midterms, establishment Democrats continue to fear losing control over their party to this younger socialist wing. And there has previously been some talk about having the Democratic Socialist wing of the Democratic Party break off and join with other parties like DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, in order to form a third party. And so far, that's been a lot more speculation and proposal than actual movement. But I do think it is a matter of time. We're only a few election cycles away until a Democratic Socialist candidate breaks out, like another Bernie Sanders, and you have this massive groundswell of support for him by the left, predominantly on the younger side, which is the future of the Democrat Party. And these socialist candidates eventually become the mainstream left in this country. And we can look at there's just a lot of data that show the trend lines here. But, we continue to look at these polls. You call them directionally accurate or generally accurate, if not specifically accurate. But there was this Pew Research poll done a few years ago. It said 40% of Americans aged 18 to 29 say they hold favorable views of socialism. In March of this year, the Cato Institute and YouGov took another poll. They found that 62% of adults aged 18 to 29 hold favorable views of socialism. This is at least what they say. And so there's ample reason, this is not just polling data, but it's just demographics as well. There's ample reason to believe that socialism is or soon will be in a period of political ascendancy. I think with Bernie Sanders' run in 2016, and then you got AOC, and you've got the Squad. Now you got Zohran Mamdani. You got this Democratic Socialist candidate in I think is it Minneapolis? He actually defeated the incumbent establishment, this little Somali dude. But at any rate, he's on the Democratic Socialist side. So I do think we're continuing to see momentum build for this quote unquote Democratic Socialist movement in this country. So what's going to happen over the next few election cycles, let's call it 10 years, is the boomer generation has been a moderating force on American politics. They've not wanted to rock the boat. I constantly hear complaints from Democratic Socialists about these establishment Republicans like Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. They're old, they're out of touch, they don't understand what's really going on. They eschew the populist left, even though, according to the populist left, the Democratic Socialists, those are the solutions that can actually solve problems. By 2030, in just 5 years, all boomers are going to be above age 65. And what's obviously going to happen is over the next 10 years, their power and influence on U.S. politics will be in decline, especially within the Democrat Party. And it's going to reshape American politics because this moderating force is going to be displaced, not just by the populist left wing, but we see this now. We see this today, even in Republican politics. The moderating force is going to be replaced, or maybe not replaced, but at least displaced, at least partially displaced by the populist right. And I still think we're ultimately headed towards a conflict between the populist left, so Democratic Socialists, and the populist right, which is national. It's not even national conservatism. It's national post-conservatism, whatever that looks like. And that's obviously where we're headed. And I would just go back also. But Ray Dalio talked about this back in 2016, hedge fund billionaire. He said, I'm concerned and he said this at Davos at the World Economic Forum, I'm concerned there's going to be a domestic conflict or civil war in this country, broadly breaking down between capitalism and socialism. Folks, we're waiting for the big debt crisis to hit, and that is going to unleash a lot of instability, a lot of very rapid change as well. So I put that on your calendar at some point in the future. It's going to happen. With that, let's go ahead and move on to, speaking of something happens. Robert, I know nothing ever happens until it does, but something is happening here. We have these Obama-era national security staffers calling for resistance to the Trump administration. What's going on?
So this is actually from an op-ed published yesterday. It's written by National Security Council officials Stephen Simon and Jonathan Stevenson, who both served during the Obama administration. And they said that they and other former officials no longer expect U.S. military leaders to resist President Trump's, quote, misuse of the military. And there are some interesting points they make here. One, they say that current U.S. military leadership no longer see themselves as guardians of the constitutional order and have placed their own career advancement over constitutional moral qualms about their conduct. And then they said that it may be left to the Supreme Court to enforce constitutional discipline on the U.S. military through what they call a broadly applicable unanimous decision. I think they're doing two major things here. One, they're providing a permission structure for elected Democrats to and Democrat supporters in the federal aid in the executive branch agencies to ramp up resistance to Trump's domestic National Guard and active duty deployments in support of ICE. And the second important thing here, they are basically setting a political frame that the only legitimate ruling that the Supreme Court can make in some of these lawsuits against military support for deportation operations is to side against the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. All right, so this is pretty important because one of the big, you go back to the color revolution doctrine, and whether it doesn't matter if we're talking about a resistance movement or an actual revolutionary movement. One of the big things is, one of the prerequisites for a color revolution is that you have NGOs, non-governmental organizations, capable of building a strategy and capable of training and guiding people through that strategy. There's ongoing training, online, in person. It's across the country on this strategy. It is happening now. So this is very significant to me, Robert, just looking at the future of political stability and knowing what we do about color revolutionary doctrine. When you have senior administration or senior officials of a previous administration actively promoting and working on these resistance strategies, that is a very good early warning indicator that this base is being built up, the strategy is being developed, or in some cases being implemented. And just one other thing here too. There was a lot of freak out, and I was in this too, back from 2008 through in 2016 about Obama taking over and firing generals and replacing them with generals that he wanted, and being in control of DHS. And it's this national Obama army, and all this stuff. And that nothing ever happened with them. I want to say, Robert, that nothing's going to happen with the Trump stuff, but I tell you, a lot of very important people believe that it is. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, they do think so. In this article, they specifically talk about U.S. North Command, and how Trump is effectively combining NORTHCOM with DHS to create a domestic army, basically that they think he's going to aim at his political enemies. So far, he has not done that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that enough indicators have popped up to say that he is going to do that. But they are. I don't think that they're necessarily being cynical here. They probably are legitimately concerned that Trump is going to use the levers of state power to punish his political enemies. And part of that might even be a guilty conscience, because the Biden administration did that for 4 years, in many cases, not using the military, but using other levers of state power, like debanking through some of those independent financial regulators, and using the DOJ to go after political opponents, including at the time former President Trump. So I think there is a concern that they feel like, I'm sure they are genuinely concerned that Trump is going to act in kind and use the leverage of state power to go after people that he feels has slighted him, either personally or politically. And we can see in some cases that there are, the DOJ is going after the Manhattan, not Manhattan District Attorney, the New York State Attorney General, Letitia James. They're investigating her over some of those cases that were brought against Trump during the Biden administration. And I do think the one of the central arguments they make is that Trump is undermining the democratic civilian control of the military, which I find it was kind of blown away by that, because they're basically saying that he's undermining the democratic civilian control of the military by getting elected and controlling the military. So there is some, I don't think they're being cynical with this. I think they really do believe this, but I think that the effect of these former officials coming out is basically a support for an attempt at delegitimizing the Trump administration, in support of like the democracy ID groups that are building up for what amounts to a color revolution.
Mm-hmm. This has been the big problem for the progressive left or the establishment left. Is it's very easy to target an administration or target a government when it's illegitimate. But President Trump was elected very legitimately. And so that is, his legitimacy has largely been, at least concerning the election, has been unassailable. So they've had to pursue other ways to try to delegitimize him. And my initial reaction has been, oh, the left is overreacting. I think Trump's going to be a dictator, and this is going to be the USSA here in the next 6 months or something like that. I thought that outlook was kind of laughable. But Robert, here's the thing that very concerns me greatly. They are going to try to push the Trump administration into that. They're going to do things that skirt the letter of the law. They're going to do things that are probably illegal, like attempts to maybe they're not even overtly illegal, but there is some shield of the First Amendment, like trying to reduce the legitimacy, authority, and capacity of the Trump administration and really the federal government here. And my concern is that they're going to try to push the Trump administration into taking extreme measures in response to their own extreme measures. And we actually get into this, I call it a self-licking ice cream cone, where the left does something, the right responds, and the left points at them and says, oh, look, I told you they were fascists. And then there's a right response to that. And then there's the left response to that. And then there's the right. And where does it end? When does it stop? If not in some form of domestic conflict? Robert, I'm very worried that is where we are headed. It's not anytime soon. It's not in the next 6 months, but over the next couple of years, that is a fear of mine.
Well, I think that's a fear of these two former national security staffers too. They didn't call for this, so I want to make that clear. But they did say that one of the risks of Trump using active duty and National Guard troops to support ICE and deploy domestically is that someone who feels that, or someone who has radicalized themselves to see this happening, could pick up a gun and shoot at some of these military service members while they're deployed domestically. And the military is trained to return fire, and that this will set off some kind of incident that, in their view, would basically cement Trump's legitimacy in deploying the military. He would then be able to have a justification for cracking down on the Trump resistance. Mm-hmm. So I think they're concerned about it too. And just to be clear, they did not call for that, but that was a risk that they feel is real from coming out of this military deployment domestically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you get a Kent State type of event. Or do you know if these National Guardsmen who are deployed to DC, are they carrying live rounds? Because we've seen a lot of cases where National Guard gets mobilized and they're carrying AR-15s, but there's no magazines in there, or they're actually not carrying rounds. Have you seen anything?
I haven't seen anything that says either way, whether they are carrying weapons with no ammo or they actually have ammunition on them.
Mm-hmm. Just one other thing too. Then they're actually military police companies, and they train in riot control and crowd control and this stuff. Do you know if it's these companies that are being mobilized, or are these like logistics or fuel supply specialists being mobilized to do crowd control? Because I think there's a huge difference probably in like temperament and training between those two types of National Guard soldiers.
Well, in the DC, I'm not sure which specific units have been deployed. I know that this concept for that QRF, that basically hit nationwide QRF, that was specifically, at least in its initial iteration, military police units, military police National Guard units from Alabama and Arizona.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that goes back to 2020. They were talking about doing that, right? All right. Yeah. By the way, I did see this morning on I think it was Reddit, one of the Reddit forums. Basically, this guy was saying how laughable it is, talking about how. So, Robert, these National Guard MP companies, what's their timeline to deploy once they do get called up? How long is that supposed to be?
The QRF concept, it was 1 hour basically each unit has 300. That's 300 in Alabama, 300 in Arizona. And then they have like a set of phases. So the first phase of 100 personnel would be in the first hour. And then I think the next is like 12 hours.
Okay. So you've got 100 National Guard personnel sitting in an office near the flight line somewhere, basically just waiting for nothing to happen. Essentially, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So these guys is like, grab your bag, put on your helmet, and we're going to get on this plane, this C-17 or whatever, and we're going to go fly. So at any rate, basically they're saying how laughable it is to expect for there to be any significant National Guard presence if a riot were to break out, which I think is a fair point. I mean, it's going to take time to mobilize. All right. So thanks for that, Robert. And let's go ahead and move on here to the next item. Gerrymander Watch, the infamous Gene Wu, idiot from Houston. What's the latest?
So Gene Wu was on Meet the Press yesterday, and he and Texas Democrats are basically taking a victory lap, or attempting to, and I think signaling that enough of them are going to return to Texas by tomorrow to give a quorum to the Texas House. Gene Wu claims that Democrats have succeeded in their goal to, quote, kill this corrupt special session. He was actually pressed a little bit in this interview, and he did basically the interviewer accused him of moving the goalposts here, and he said, well, no, we've always only wanted to end this first special session, but he did say that they're discussing future strategies to oppose this mid-decade redistricting. Specifically, they're considering some lawsuits, and he did say vaguely procedural moves in the Texas legislature, and basically public information campaigns to oppose this mid-decade redistricting. I think when I watched this 10-minute interview, I think this is a likely indicator that, like with the Gavin Newsom trying to get Trump to back off, that Democrats have realized they're not in a strong position here to force the GOP to back down on this mid-decade redistricting plan. Mm-hmm. I think based on watching what Gene Wu has said and this moving of the goalposts, is that I think it's probable that enough Texas Democrats are planning to return by Attorney General Paxton's deadline tomorrow. And I think Wu is giving some political cover to those Texas Democrats. Because something similar happened in the Texas Senate when they passed the map yesterday, is that all but two of the Texas Democrat senators left to effectively, not break quorum, but to not give their vote, and two stayed behind, which was enough to give the Senate a quorum. And those two senators are claiming that they did that so they could just get on with the lawsuits against this map. I think really Democrats here expected a large popular outcry and maybe some protests to materialize over this gerrymandering fight, and I don't think it has.
Mm-hmm. Well, it has not yet, but I have seen some of these Texas-based NGOs get behind this weekend's National Day of Protest. There's a handful of them, and there will be protests in Texas and across the country to try to bring more attention to this. Robert, my expectation from literally day one is Democrats are going to fail. This redistricting plan is going to get passed to the Texas House. If it's not this session, it's going to be the next special session. By the way, this session ends tomorrow, and Governor Abbott has already called for another special session to begin also tomorrow, as soon as the first special session ends. So this looks like it's going to get passed eventually, one way or the other, by the Texas House. Just briefly, the next step for Democrats is to challenge us in the courts. How long is it going to take for, I guess the question is, Republicans have till December. Are they going to get the ruling they want by December?
This is one way I think it could play out. So they file a lawsuit, they try to block the map. If the court might allow the suit to go forward while still allowing Texas to implement the map. That's happened before, I think, in like Ohio and a couple of other states have had a similar fight over congressional district maps. The courts have allowed them to implement them for the upcoming election, at least while the lawsuit makes its way through. So Texas might not have to wait on a decision before they can put this map into effect.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. And do please continue to watch Gerrymandering. the Gerrymander watch, because it may not be a trigger, but it will be an accelerator of social and political instability, especially if it ends up protecting the Republican House majority. There's going to be enormous domestic problems if this actually does end up happening. So thanks for that. All right, let's move on here to more Chinese aggression at Scarborough Shoal. It's a Thursday. What's the latest, Jared?
Well, yeah. But this is framed differently. So the United States performed freedom of navigation operations over at the Scarborough Shoal, and those are colloquially just FONOPs. So that's what the acronym is down there. The Chinese claim that they drove away the American forces, and the U.S. says, no, we just completed the mission, because all it is just you run through an area. So
just to say
you plan on leaving.
We can. Yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, the Philippines is reporting that they also had a run-in. One of their Coast Guard aircraft was intercepted by a Chinese fighter yesterday, and this was during a maritime domain awareness flight. So just go and check out the area. The Chinese fighter passed over the PCG Cessna at just 200 feet, which the Philippines is calling a dangerous maneuver. They also maintained a fairly close distance at 500 feet, but that could just be for, visual identification. Now, why does this matter? China's trying to save their face. Let's just call it how it is. What happened the other day was really embarrassing for China, particularly their military. It looks bad.
You're talking about the Chinese Coast Guard ramming into the Chinese destroyer. Okay.
Looks terrible. And it was railed across social media, which is the arena for information warfare. It went probably viral, if we're being frank here. So I think China is likely to become much more aggressive if these additional maneuvers that they're doing, where, hey, we drove off the Americans, we drove off the Filipinos. If those don't work, they don't actually produce anything measurable, then I expect China to get just as aggressive as we saw on Monday, where they accidentally ended up ramming their own ship. We could probably see a lot more of that. Now, this additional aggression, I do expect will probably expand throughout the rest of the South China Sea, not just this single shoal. But we could see this aggression expand to other territorial disputes like China or Japan's southern islands, because China is always maintaining a presence there, and it's the same entities, and they claim that territory. So they legally, per them, have the right to drive you away. Now, rapidly repeated dangerous maneuvers like this, particularly the rapid portion here, can lead to complacency or miscalculation on either side. Basically, I think I can get away. No, you can't get away, and you accidentally get hit, or the Chinese overestimate and they end up actually killing somebody here. All of these can potentially result in an accidentally lethal encounter. So you may intend to hit a ship but not kill somebody, and if you do kill somebody, now you are in an issue. You're in a much deeper issue. One thing,
an act of war.
Yes, one thing I do want to mention is that the Philippines has been talking about, what is our response to this? It can't just be nothing. And the Philippine National Security Advisor said there's no need for the Philippine military to become involved at this moment, but the Philippines is ready if the time comes. And their defense minister said the other day that they maintain they can respond in lethal force if they need to. So this can escalate very quick.
All right. Thanks for that update, Jared. And I think we do have a handful of questions. Let's prioritize the member questions from the briefing room. By the way, today's a great day to join, forwardobserver.com. You can, wherever you're watching, we also stream this live through our briefing room on our website or on the high side, and you can ask us questions. We're just going to have to start taking questions from members only because there are a lot of questions. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into it, Jared.
Absolutely. So from Ben, with the Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska tomorrow, it feels like the ground is shifting. This is a long one. Is shifting while the subversive EU leadership continues to surrender its culture. More than a simple venue change, it seems like it's a move with a significant message that, okay, what are your thoughts on all of this? Basically, I think the U.S. is just trying to reassert its hegemony. Hey, you come here, you meet us here, we will talk about this, assert a ceasefire, say, because that's what Trump is doing. He said if you don't take the ceasefire, you're going to face more consequences. Just yesterday. So it's just asserting dominance.
Yeah, and at a strategic level, absolutely nothing has changed. Trump does not want to be embroiled in Ukraine. He wants to focus on the Indo-Pacific and more specifically Taiwan and the South China Sea. So we're trying to extract ourselves from this and, probably give that mission to the Europeans and just say, you're supposed to be paying 5% of GDP towards defense projects. So it's your problem now. So we'll see. Nothing about my expectation fundamentally has changed about this. This is just a face-to-face meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin to try to negotiate a deal.
Yep. From the overnight, Mike, can you please provide a book list for those building an Intel library? Or if you've already posted one, can you give us the location?
Yeah, I have posted that on social media before. I will post that out. I'll post that on our Fort Observer website. The problem is people ask for a reading list. A reading list on what? Because there's a lot of topics that we cover. But, obviously there's intel collection, there's intelligence analysis, and then throw in counterintelligence and intelligence networks, and then we get into low intensity conflict, insurgency, guerrilla warfare, color revolutions, etc., violent social movements. So, yes, I will just come up with a master reading list for everyone.
Okay. We have one more I'll send to you privately.
All right.
But
here, I got them here, Jared. I'll just run down them here real quick in the chat here. What are the 10 best intelligence agencies in the world, both government and private sector? And what are the 5 best books on Mossad? Listen, I'm not an expert on global intelligence agencies, but intelligence is like I just said, intelligence is a big term. So within intelligence, you have all sorts of different collection operations and intel operations. So I'd say like for SIGINT, for instance, American SIGINT at NSA continues to be the gold standard globally, and we can get into beyond. I would say probably the U.S. through National Reconnaissance Office and our satellites and all the IMET assets we have, we're probably the best at imagery as well. I can't give you a better answer than that, but that's pretty much what I know that I can tell you off the top of my head. We're definitely not the best at human. I'll tell you that for sure. Or counterintelligence. That's for darn sure. All right, next question is, have you seen any more information in regards to the Chinese Shulong 2 survey vessel operating in the vicinity of Alaska? Notice she's been dark on the AIS transponder since transiting through the Sea of Japan.
Yeah.
Jared, is this a significant thing?
No, we covered it. Basically, she's up there. She's going. I think they had sent a previous one, but it's all the same analysis. They're just taking a look at the seabed, and yeah, it's probably spying.
Okay. All right. Frozen Nomad asks, what are the biggest positive and negative impacts that you see coming out of the fast accelerating pace of AI advancement having on our lives over the next decade? And are you doing anything to position or prepare for these rapid changes? Man, this is a great question. We need to get an AI guy to answer some of these questions. The kind of the consensus that I've seen, that I think there's 2 things that I think are correct. Number one, we actually don't yet understand the scale of the impact of AI. There are tons of things that AI is probably going to be able to do that we don't fully understand. And we have seen some of these AI CEOs come out and say, however you think AI is going to change human life, you're underestimating it. That's kind of number one. And and then you had that AI CEO come out and say it's going to lead to 20% of American job losses or something like that. So maybe that's the first thing. The second thing is it is obviously going to displace American workers, as if American jobs have not already been displaced enough. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't expect higher unemployment rates in the future. We have this next recession whenever it happens, whether it becomes a financial crisis or the big debt crisis finally hits, the acute part of the big debt crisis. Maybe it hits. Obviously, these large corporations, instead of hiring back workers coming out of a recession, many of these Americans are just going to be replaced by AI. So, and then you have these estimates that it's going to displace 30 or 50% of American workers. Nobody knows yet. And I do think that there's the other side of this too. And people say, well, it's like people were concerned when the automobile came out. All these horse farriers and people who take care of horses. They're all going to lose their jobs now because everyone's got an automobile. And you just had this flourishing of new jobs and new technology. I'm not sure that's going to be the case. I'm sure some jobs obviously will be created that we can't even fathom. It's like going back 20 years ago and telling someone, hey, there's going to be iPhone repair shops on every corner in the city. And you say, well, I don't even know what that is. Similar thing. But the job destruction for sure is going to be faster than new job creation. So I would say, however you think you would prepare for higher unemployment, probably prepare for that. And also too, look at your personal risk. Like consider your occupation or your job, your career, and determine your risk of AI displacing you, because there's a whole lot of people, recent college graduates and people who are about to graduate from college in the next few years, who are going to be graduating into a marketplace or a job marketplace that is simply not hiring because AI is cheaper, or obviously H-1Bs have been also cheaper. Now even H-1Bs probably are going to be competing with AI. So consider that. And I will just say this too. One thing that significantly compounds the risk of a low intensity conflict in this country is high youth unemployment. That is a universal early warning indicator of civil strife. When you have a lot of young people with nothing to do, they have no conceivable future. They have no job, no career path, maybe no reason for a lot of optimism. Even if they had a job, they probably still couldn't buy a house. They don't. And so what happens is over their lifetime, their annual earning potential reduces. Their lifetime earning potential reduces. They are suddenly no longer going to be better off than their parents were. They're already not better off than their parents were at this age. We know this because there's tons of studies that say this. And you get into this thing, they call it Zoomer nihilism. No, nothing matters. Nothing. I have no future. All these Zoomers, these young people say, I've got no future. Let's just be nihilistic because nothing matters. Sounds like a recipe for disaster socially and politically to me, and also economically. So that's probably another reason why I'm very concerned about a low intensity conflict happening in this country. And again, for those of you unaware, low intensity conflict is a war. It's actual conflict that exists beneath the threshold of conventional war. So we're not talking about tanks and bombers, but it exists above routine peaceful competition. So this is the gray area between war and peace. We're not at war with each other, not outright. We're definitely not at peace with each other. And that is it's going to be a huge driver of instability. So great question. I wish I could give you a better answer. We'll run through a couple more of these and we'll save the rest for tomorrow. So how is the dollar doing as the reserve currency? I think it's doing all right. I think it just hit a new all-time high for foreign exchange transactions being conducted in the dollar. Still very strong. There have been some attempts to de-dollarize. It's not a serious threat, not in the near term. And now you have the Treasury and the Trump administration, and at some point the Feds, I'm sure, is going to be involved, threatening these countries not to de-dollarize. That the stick is probably going to be greater than the carrot in many cases. So on a long enough timeline, of course, everyone should be concerned about the dollar losing global reserve status. It will probably not happen. It's not going to happen anytime soon. We'll say that. All right. Wouldn't the more Trump warns people about de-dollarization create more de-dollarization in the long run? The more tariffs, the more they move to another system. Well, you know who has a really good answer on this is Brent Johnson. He runs Santiago Capital. He's the dollar milkshake theory guy. And his core argument is there's somewhere between 30 to 50 trillion dollars in dollar denominated debt that exists around the world. So outside the United States. If you're in Turkey, you're in Nigeria, you're in Estonia, wherever you are, you're a business or you have taken out a loan that is priced in dollars. You will have to probably pay that back in dollars, maybe gold, but it has to be paid back, probably in dollars. That creates demand for dollars because you have to meet your monthly payments which means you have to take your Estonian currency, whatever it is, or your Nigerian currency, whatever, the Turkish lira, or whatever they use in Turkey, and you got to go buy dollars with it to pay back your dollar-denominated loan. That's a $30 to $50 trillion problem, and you cannot just default on these dollar-denominated loans. People seem to think like, oh, the whole world's just going to stop using the dollar, and the dollar's going to zero, and we're going to have hyperinflation. It doesn't work. It's not going to be. It can't be that clean. These countries are in an intractable problem, if that's a word. They're in a major problem because de-dollarization is not simple. It's going to be very painful for anyone to de-dollarize. And then you also have, then you have network effects. You're trying to buy something for a foreign country. They don't want to take your Turkish currency. They want to price it in gold, price it in dollars. I think a BRICS currency is a pipe dream. A Chinese gold-backed internet, like external payment system or external trade currency. Michael Every has talked about this. I could see that happening. But people are not just going to walk away from the dollar system. They literally can't. They're locked into the dollar system. That's kind of the evil genius thing from the Treasury and the Fed. It really is evil genius stuff. These countries are locked in. They cannot escape, probably, without some level of national suicide. Because how can you take hundreds of billions of dollars? I mean, a substantial portion of your GDP just dries up. We're talking about economic depression type stuff if you just completely disconnect yourself from the dollar system, which also is going to cause massive problems for your own currency. So I'm not at all concerned about de-dollarization right now. In 5 or 10 years, that will probably change. But in the interim, I'm not concerned in the slightest. All right. We'll just run through these. I realize this is speculation, but what do you think the odds the next election being contested regardless of the outcome? So the presidential election 2020, I don't know. I can't give you a definite answer, but it's obviously substantial. Just being the stakes. If it is close, it will probably be challenged. The big reason why you couldn't challenge the 2024 elections because it's not the blowout Trump said it was, but it was a real win in the popular vote and the electoral college. So if we have a close election, it's probably going to be challenged, and I can't give you the exact odds, obviously. Who is the best at HUMINT and counter intel? I don't know, probably the Israelis or the Russians. Obviously, the Israelis are quite good at it. So probably them or the Russians. I don't know, the Brits. I don't know. Yeah, maybe the Cubans, maybe some of the Soviet-trained intelligence agencies. All right, everyone. Hey, thanks so much. That's going to do it for today. We appreciate your support. Head over to forwardobserver.com. Today at 2 p.m., I'm doing my Color Revolution update for the month of August. I'm going to be putting the latest puzzle pieces together, providing my outlook on timing, what you can expect, when you can expect it, what it's going to look like, worst case scenario, most likely scenario, and it's coming up on 2 p.m. Central Time today over on the Forward Observer briefing room, forwardobserver.com. Go sign up for a free 7-day trial. If you watch the show, support our mission, forwardobserver.com. And with that, everyone, we will be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on this show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.